A warm welcome to everyone who is starting to join us for what promises to be an exciting 3 days of thoughtful discussions. I am Gustavo Alegret. I am a journalist. I work for NTN24 as the US News Director, and I'll be your master of ceremonies for the next 3 days. Before we officially open this year's conference, I want to invite you all to explore the platform that has been built exclusively for this event. If you registered online, you should have received your platform login and password via email. On the platform, you can find the agenda, read more about our speakers, and engage via Twitter with other conference participants using our hashtag Diálogo CAF 2020. But most importantly, you can network and chat with your fellow attendees as well as submit questions for all our panels. And now we are ready to officially open the 24th Annual CAF Conference.
Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. It is my great pleasure to welcome everyone to the 24th Annual CAF Conference.
Michael, you are not...
Not on yet?
You're not live yet.
Okay, I'm sorry.
MC will come back in.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists and viewers, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the iconic 24th Annual CAF Conference hosted by the Inter-American Dialogue, CAF Development Bank of Latin America, and the Organization of American States. We are coming to you live from the conference headquarters here in Washington, D.C. For the first time in its history, the conference is being conducted virtually. A warm welcome to all the viewers who are joining us via our platform, our live stream, and those joining through the platforms of our media partners, El País, América Economía, and NTN24. Before we begin, to be sure to participate in the conversation using our hashtag Diálogo CAF 2020. To start off our 3 morning of engaging and lively discussions, I would like to introduce Michael Shifter, President of the Inter-American Dialogue, who will offer welcoming remarks, followed by Luis Carranza, President of the CAF Development Bank of Latin America. Michael.
Thank you, Gustavo, and good morning or good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. It is a great pleasure to welcome everyone to the 24th Annual CAF Conference. For more than 2 decades, the Dialogue has been collaborating with CAF to produce this annual event, also supported by the OAS. Since 1996, the conference has been held on the Wednesday and Thursday after Labor Day. The idea was to bring people together to focus afresh on the agenda in the Americas after the summer holidays when students go back to school. Yet this year, the notion of going back to school has acquired new meaning. The global pandemic has altered all of our lives, at least for some time, perhaps even permanently. So we are convening virtually, and though we miss seeing everyone in person, we are thrilled to have over 5,000 registered participants. In the conference's 24-year history, I cannot recall another time as critical as today to bring together diverse and influential perspectives from around the hemisphere to focus on a common agenda. The purpose of the conference is to address together the formidable challenges we confront with the seriousness and imagination that this sober moment demands. For the dialogue, this conference has always represented an opportunity to rethink and reshape our agenda moving forward and to incorporate invaluable inputs to advance our mission of fostering democratic governance, prosperity, and social equity in Latin America and the Caribbean. It is our hope that this space for open and frank exchange and thoughtful reflection will help contribute in some measure to greater hemispheric cooperation, which is needed now more than ever. This year, we are particularly fortunate to feature a wide array of exceptionally high-quality speakers. We thank them for agreeing to participate and share their views. They will examine the social and economic implications of COVID-19, the weaknesses and strengths of the region's healthcare systems, how to make progress in combating global climate change, threats to democratic governance and the rule of law, and the implications of the upcoming US presidential elections on the region. We are particularly honored to have as our keynote speaker the President of Uruguay, Luis Lacalle Pou, who will be introduced by the dialogue's co-chair and former Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Ambassador Tom Shannon. Please allow me to give special heartfelt thanks for the impressive organizational work performed by the dialogue's remarkable team, led by Sofia Laninda, a real taskmaster who learned new technologies to make this conference viable, and to Denise Yanovich, who has been working tirelessly over recent months to ensure success. We also owe a huge debt to the excellent CAF team. This has been a genuine and productive partnership, and we hope it will continue. With that introduction, it is now my great pleasure and honor to introduce our partner, the President of CAF, Luis Carranza. President Carranza has been at the helm of CAF since April 2017. Before that, he served as Minister of Economy and Finance of Peru. President Carranza, let me turn it over to you.
Muchas gracias, Michael. Es un placer darles la bienvenida a esta conferencia anual que se realiza en momentos muy críticos para la región. Esta es la crisis más grave para la mayoría de países en su vida republicana. Y nuestros países tienen que enfrentar los retos estructurales que se han visto agravados por la pandemia y nuevos desafíos globales. La pandemia ha hecho más patente el problema de desigualdad en América Latina, pero no solo desigualdad de ingresos, sino también desigualdad en acceso a bienes y servicios públicos. Hemos visto cómo los casos de corrupción y problemas de gestión pública en el ámbito sanitario han afectado a los más vulnerables y han deslegitimado a esos gobiernos. El tema de brecha de infraestructura en el ámbito sanitario y digital ha sido más patente durante la pandemia. Y los problemas de informalidad han generado desafíos en ver cómo se realiza la contención de la población y, por otro lado, cómo asistimos a la población con transferencias directas. La recuperación de las economías va a ser lenta y va a depender de características estructurales que no son homogéneas entre los países. En particular, la capacidad para implementar políticas fiscales y monetarias expansivas para reactivar la demanda, la posibilidad de implementar políticas que incrementen el empleo, la inversión y la productividad, y la salud financiera de nuestras economías. Sistemas financieros más sólidos van a poder absorber este shock de una mejor manera en sus hojas de balances y reactivar más rápido el crédito para promover la inversión privada. Definitivamente tenemos nuevos retos: la transformación digital, el cambio climático, las relaciones geopolíticas en el mundo. Y tenemos que abordarlos de una manera coherente, aprovechando las oportunidades y mitigando los riesgos, porque si no, la desigualdad va a crecer aún más en nuestra región. ¿Cómo enfrentar estos retos? De una manera pragmática y con cooperación internacional. De la misma manera como América Latina salió de la crisis de la deuda de los 80, construyendo institucionalidad fiscal y monetaria que les permitió implementar buenas políticas. Lo mismo tenemos que hacer en el ámbito de la actuación social de nuestros gobiernos, especialmente en temas de salud y educación, con buena regulación, procesos internos, recursos, capital humano, pero sobre todo no confundiendo los instrumentos con los objetivos. Tenemos que abordar de una manera definitiva el reto de cerrar la brecha de infraestructura, especialmente la digital y la infraestructura que sirve para la integración. Y para eso requerimos esfuerzo fiscal, pero también mucha cooperación internacional, para poder tener fuentes de financiamiento de largo plazo a tasas concesionales que permitan de manera sostenible avanzar en el reto de cerrar la brecha. Y abordar definitivamente el problema de integración de nuestra región, no como proceso político, sino como un instrumento útil para mejorar el bienestar de nuestros ciudadanos. Esta conferencia nos va a servir para generar ideas que nos ayuden a enfrentar estos retos que tenemos por delante. Muchísimas gracias por participar.
Muchas gracias, Presidente Carranza. And thank you, Michael Shifter. Thank you both for those inspiring words to launch our event. Now I would like to introduce Ambassador Tom Shannon, current co-chair of the board of the Inter-American Dialogue, who will introduce our keynote speaker, President of Uruguay, His Excellency Luis Lacalle Pou. Ambassador Shannon has spent over 30 years in the U.S. Foreign Service, most recently as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, the third highest ranking position at the State Department. During his career, Ambassador Shannon served in the U.S. Foreign Service at embassies in Guatemala, Brazil, South Africa, and Venezuela. He is currently a senior international policy advisor for Arnold & Porter. It is my pleasure to welcome Ambassador Shannon. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and I'm very grateful for the words of Michael Shifter and Luis Carranza. Estamos muy honrados hoy de tener con nosotros como orador principal el presidente de Uruguay, Luis Lacalle Pou. El presidente Lacalle, nacido en 1973 y con 47 años de edad, representa la vanguardia de una nueva generación de liderazgo latinoamericano. Él empezó su carrera política en 2000, al comienzo de un nuevo siglo, cuando fue elegido como diputado del Departamento de Canelones y fue reelegido para los siguientes periodos legislativos y presidió la Cámara de Representantes de 2011 a 2012. En 2014, él fue elegido senador de la República y desempeñó como senador de 2015 hasta 2019. El 30 de junio de 2019, él fue elegido por el Partido Nacional como candidato presidencial. Liderando una coalición de partidos, ganó las elecciones presidenciales en 2019 y asumió poder como presidente en marzo de 2020. Su presidencia empezó con el gran desafío de la pandemia y sus consecuencias nefastas en nuestras economías y en nuestras sociedades. A mí me gustaría notar que Uruguay ha jugado un papel central en la diplomacia y en la política, no solamente de Sudamérica, pero de nuestro hemisferio, por más que un siglo. Montevideo fue la sede de la séptima conferencia de los Estados Americanos en 1933, cuando el entonces secretario del Estado, Cordell Hull, articuló la política del Good Neighbor del presidente Franklin Roosevelt y cambió fundamentalmente las relaciones entre los Estados Unidos y los países de las Américas. Uruguay ha jugado un papel central y importante por más que un siglo en la construcción de la cooperación y colaboración en las Américas. Esta gerencia de diplomacia, sabiduría y visión positiva ya está en las manos del presidente Lacalle. Presidente Lacalle, muchísimas gracias por su tiempo hoy y estamos anticipando sus palabras con mucho interés y gusto. Muchísimas gracias.
Buenos días, good morning, buenas tardes, good afternoon. Agradecerles la invitación para participar en esta importante conferencia. He estado viendo quiénes son los speakers, los que van a comentar en estos tiempos tan difíciles que vive el planeta, y me parece que las conclusiones que se pueden sacar de escuchar a gente inteligente y con experiencia es muy importante. Quiero aprovechar para felicitar a la CAF por su 50 aniversario y también agradecer el papel que ha tenido históricamente en nuestro país y sobre todo en esta pandemia. Yo quiero encarar estas palabras no solo sobre lo que hemos hecho cada nación o particularmente con lo que ha hecho nuestro país, sino las enseñanzas y el nuevo mundo que se abre delante de nosotros. Nuestro gobierno asumió el 1 de marzo con una agenda muy proactiva, con transformaciones del gobierno, transformaciones en lo privado y en lo público, y a los 12 días se encuentra con la pandemia instalada en nuestro país. Lo primero que nos dimos cuenta es que no había un modelo predictivo único, que no había un manual para esta enfermedad. Y cuando uno miraba el derecho comparado, cuando uno miraba los distintos países, empezaba a ver resultados disímiles. Primero se nos dijo que se debía a las estaciones, a los seasons, que se debía a que una estación estaba en el hemisferio norte y otra en el hemisferio sur. Pero países en iguales hemisferios estaban teniendo los mismos resultados, o mejor dicho, distintos resultados. Ya no era un tema de invierno y verano. Y allí es donde uno empieza a tomar noción de que eran las conductas humanas las que determinaban las consecuencias más profundas o no de esta pandemia. Y en ese sentido es que nosotros actuamos. Y actuamos con un concepto que creo que ha cobrado una importancia vital en estos tiempos, que es un concepto que subyace en cualquier acción que debe llevar adelante un gobierno, que es la libertad. La libertad es el estado más puro del individuo, pero una libertad solidaria, una libertad social. Lo que ha quedado claro en esta pandemia es que no hay ya compartimentos estancos, que finalmente se instaló la globalización, que finalmente el mundo es uno y que cualquier conducta en cualquier punto del planeta puede llegar a tener consecuencias, en este caso negativas, para el resto de la humanidad. Con lo cual la integración, con lo cual la solidaridad, con lo cual la generosidad ya no es algo voluntario, se hace necesario. Y por eso la libertad ha estado presente en todas y cada una de nuestras medidas. Medidas que fueron tomadas, insisto, sin tener un mapa de ruta, sin tener un manual sobre el cual basarnos para tratar la pandemia. Por supuesto que los países que tenían una infraestructura, que tenían un sistema de salud, que tenían determinadas previsiones, pudieron tener esa safety net que de alguna manera ayuda a pasar de una manera menos dañina los efectos de la pandemia. Por supuesto que los países que tenían una economía saneada y aquellos que tenían acceso al crédito tienen y tuvimos otra oportunidad para llevar adelante la emergencia. En nuestro caso no era el de una economía saneada, pero sí era y sí es un país que tiene acceso al crédito, a los organismos multilaterales de crédito, a los cuales recurrimos en estos tiempos, ya que los rubros y los recursos económicos en nuestro país no abundaban. Y por eso creo que ahí tenemos un punto en esta integración mundial y regional, que es fortalecer a los organismos multilaterales de crédito, no solo desde el punto de vista del capital, no solo desde el punto de vista de la disponibilidad, sino también de abarcar más soluciones o agrandarle su caja de herramientas para este tipo de situaciones. Porque lo que queda claro, lo que todos sabemos, que vamos a convivir con la incertidumbre, que vamos a convivir con lo nuevo. Y para eso también, y en nuestro país, le hemos echado mano a la generosidad de la ciencia. Es muy importante que las decisiones políticas puedan tener un sostén científico. La ciencia ha recobrado o ha ganado un lugar importantísimo en las decisiones de los dirigentes políticos. Por supuesto que la conducción de un país no es un elemento científico, pero en estos momentos en que enfermedades, pandemias necesitan tener un backup, una espalda de conocimiento, tener a la academia, tener a los científicos cerca, ha sido una bendición que debemos de agradecer. En primer término, para solucionar problemas. En primer término, como todos hicimos, correr de atrás efectos que desconocíamos. Y ahora que más o menos hay algún patrón conocido, cómo se desarrolla la enfermedad, para tener modelos a priori. Como ejemplo les pongo que nuestro país está en 3 meses empezando su temporada turística, que su temporada turística depende mucho de gente que viene del extranjero. Y hoy nosotros estamos en un continente cuyos contagios, la circulación de la enfermedad es muy grande, y por eso debemos de ser muy precavidos en el momento de pensar en abrir nuestras fronteras. Y para eso le hemos encargado a un grupo de científicos que tengan el plan verano, que tengan el plan turístico, para ver cómo hacemos para que nuestro país reciba a aquellos ciudadanos de otros países que vienen a pasar la temporada de verano. Y por eso los científicos hoy han sido reconocidos por toda la población. Pero quiero volver un poco al concepto de la libertad. Lo he conversado ya en algún foro internacional. Cuando se desata la pandemia, todos naturalmente tenemos una vocación de cuidarnos, una vocación de encerrarnos, una vocación de protegernos. Y el gobierno tiene esa vocación, como un padre de una gran familia, de proteger a sus ciudadanos. Pero es necesario tener una visión integral, porque si la decisión es solamente confinar, y en este caso, si hubiera sido una decisión obligatoria de confinarse, estaríamos dejando de prestar atención a toda la otra parte de la vida de los seres humanos, que es igual de importante. El tema de la economía para nosotros fue fundamental. aquella gente que de alguna manera vive la diaria, obtiene sus recursos diarios para poder subsistir y alimentarse, si nosotros le sugeríamos un confinamiento obligatorio, quizá el tema de la pandemia no los hubiera afectado, pero seguramente estaría en una situación económica compleja, lo que eso deriva en una caída de su nivel de vida y deriva eventualmente también en problemas de salud para esa persona y su familia. Por eso el justo equilibrio entre la libertad del individuo de seguir funcionando y el cuidado de la sociedad fue lo que nosotros buscamos. Y para eso no hay dos posibilidades. Es empoderar al ciudadano. Es empoderar de libertad al ciudadano. Y el uruguayo, el ciudadano de mi país, ha respondido ejemplarmente. Yo digo en todos lados, si hoy los registros de la pandemia en nuestro país son aceptables en comparación con el resto del mundo, no se debe al gobierno. El gobierno nada más ni nada menos interpretó lo que era una vocación nacional, que era la utilización responsable de su libertad. Y eso es una oportunidad y un legado que nos queda para el futuro. Gobiernos que no tienen temor de empoderar al ciudadano. Gobiernos que no tienen temor de dar información y ser transparentes para con el ciudadano. Eso genera confianza. Y la confianza, al igual que la libertad, es otra de las herramientas para poder trabajar sobre la incertidumbre del futuro. Si nosotros generamos discursos y acciones que se condicen, eso genera confianza. Y la confianza genera acción, y ahí se genera un círculo virtuoso. Y quiero pasar entonces al ámbito económico como consecuencia de esta pandemia. Esta crisis supera casi los efectos recesivos de la del 29. Y todos los países han sufrido esta situación. Algunos tendrán una recuperación en V, otros serán más en meseta, otros una U, pero sí sabemos, como toda crisis, que deja las consecuencias en un grupo más o menos importante de ciudadanos. Hoy nosotros tenemos uruguayos que estaban en un nivel de cierta vulnerabilidad, que han caído debido a que no tienen su ingreso mensual. Allí tiene que estar ese Estado presente. Terminemos con la ortodoxia de creer que un Estado liberal no es un Estado con sensibilidad social. La combinación debe surgir según los momentos del país. La caja de herramientas de los gobernantes debe ser lo suficientemente amplia. Entonces dejemos lo ortodoxo para la academia, que los gobernantes sepamos que de la academia y de la ciencia tenemos en distintos momentos distintos procesos para utilizar. Y en lo que hace la interrelación económica en el mundo, lo que hablaba hoy más temprano, la vocación de proteger a mis ciudadanos, de proteger a los uruguayos, como cualquier gobernante con su país, puede tener tentaciones proteccionistas. Puede llevar en este mundo, sobre todo los países que pueden autosustentarse o que tienen la capacidad de hacerlo, si es que existe uno, generar medidas proteccionistas. Y allí donde la comunidad internacional tiene que hacer un esfuerzo muy grande, muy grande. Yo hablaba hoy de mañana con el presidente Xi Jinping y justamente le hacía este planteo. Y hemos hablado con el gobierno de los Estados Unidos también en estos ámbitos y en estos temas. Y con tranquilidad y con confianza puedo decir que las grandes naciones tienen una vocación aperturista. Y esa vocación aperturista para nosotros, los países en desarrollo, es fundamental. Este mundo integrado y finalmente globalizado que nos enseñó más rápido de lo que esperábamos a obtener otras fuentes de recursos, a vivir nuestra vida social y laboral de manera distinta, necesita un mundo abierto. Necesariamente el mundo libre y abierto va a ser mejor para la humanidad. Y desde nuestro país, desde este rincón del mundo, esa es la vocación que vamos a manifestar en cada uno de los estrados. También indica algo que es muy humano y que lo vivimos en lo cotidiano y seguramente mirando a nuestros hijos y a nuestros seres queridos. Es que la vida es muy frágil y que no sabemos cuándo termina y hay que vivirla intensamente. Y eso también se traslada a las relaciones entre los estados. Hemos visto cómo, de alguna manera, la Organización Mundial del Comercio ha tenido una lentitud, un congelamiento en lo que hace a los acuerdos entre los distintos países. Vamos a un mundo, mejor dicho, ya estamos en un mundo en el cual la oferta y la demanda se genera rápidamente y hay que satisfacerla con esa misma velocidad. Y entre esa oferta y la demanda, una vez más, está mediando la política. No es una relación estrictamente pura. Allí media la política. Y nosotros los gobernantes somos los encargados de acelerar esa llegada o esa satisfacción o complementación entre la oferta y la demanda. Y en ese sentido, creo que la posibilidad de buscar nichos de mercado, de buscar cuotas, de satisfacer rápidamente, es una respuesta que los gobiernos le tienen que dar al sector privado. Es una respuesta que le tenemos que dar a aquellos que impulsan la producción de cada uno de nuestros países. Así es que Uruguay se ha parado históricamente en el mundo con sus fortalezas. Así es que Uruguay entiende su libertad y su soberanía tierra adentro, límites adentro de sus fronteras y también con la seguridad propia de una nación y un Estado que tiene firmes instituciones es que nos vamos a relacionar con el mundo. Para eso pueden contar con el país. Y fíjense que digo que para eso pueden contar con el país y no digo que pueden contar con el gobierno. Porque nuestro gobierno terminará dentro de 4 años y medio, pero la vocación aperturista, la vocación solidaria, la vocación de emprender y de relacionarse del Uruguay es mucho más que la de un presidente de la República, es mucho más que la de un partido político. Está en nuestro gen, está en nuestra esencia de surgimiento como nación hace muchos años. Por eso nosotros participamos de un nacionalismo inclusivo y no un nacionalismo refractario. Nuestro nacionalismo inclusivo hace a nuestras raíces, a lo que somos, a que tenemos una identidad como nación, pero eso, lejos de cerrarnos, nos permite tener la certidumbre, nos permite tener la seguridad de, sabiendo lo que somos, nos relacionamos abiertamente con el resto del mundo. Y es por eso que, aprovechando esta oportunidad, aprovechando estos momentos, con una pandemia que está en desarrollo, una pandemia que no nos puede permitir bajar la guardia, porque hemos visto como otros países que venían controlando la enfermedad, que venían sabiendo dónde estaban los contagios y que se hace un seguimiento de aquellas personas que han tenido contacto con los enfermos, hoy se les ha disparado. Tenemos que mantener el estado de alerta, tenemos que mantener la situación sanitaria controlada, pero también saber que esto nos genera muchas enseñanzas y nos genera oportunidades. Hacia allí va el Uruguay, seguramente contando con muchos de ustedes y obviamente una vez más agradeciéndole a la CAF y sabiendo que vamos a estrechar nuestros vínculos y a fortalecer nuestras relaciones. Muy buenas tardes y muy buenos días para todos.
Muchas gracias, presidente Lacalle Pou. Me gusta la frase que dijo en defensa del mundo libre y abierto que inspira su programa de gobierno. Thank you for such a fascinating remarks. We will now have a 10-minute break. Feel free to take a walk, grab some coffee, or catch up on emails or take advantage of the networking options on the conference platform. Participate via Twitter in the conversation using our hashtag DialogoCAF2020. We will see you back here at 10 a.m. in Bogotá, Lima, Quito, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It's 5 p.m. in Madrid, it's 10 p.m. in Bogota a.m. and 11 a.m. in Washington, D.C. And we are back and ready to begin our first session of the conference and the last session of the day, titled Economic Recovery from COVID-19 and the Future of the Social Contract. Remember that you can participate via Twitter using our conference hashtag Diálogo CAF 2020. It is now my pleasure to introduce our lead-off speaker of our first session, Luis Felipe López Calva. Luis Felipe is the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the United Nations Development Program. He has held several top positions at the UNDP and at the World Bank, including Practice Manager of the Poverty and Equity Global Practice. He formerly served as chair of the Network on Inequality and Poverty in the Latin America and Caribbean Economic Association. Luis Felipe, good luck. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It is really a privilege to lead off and moderate today's discussion in this session on economic recovery from COVID-19 and the future of the social contract. This is, of course, the first session today here in the US within the 24th Annual CAF Conference. Thanks to the partnership of CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, the Inter-American Dialogue, and the OAS, it has become a tradition to gather every year to talk about the challenges and opportunities in our region. I will start by introducing briefly our stellar panelists, even though, of course, none of them really required an introduction. So let me start with Alicia Bárcena. She's Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean since 2008. She previously served as Undersecretary General for Management and Chief of Cabinet of former Secretary General Kofi Annan at the United Nations headquarters. She has also served as Deputy Executive Secretary and Director of ECLAC's Environment and Human Settlements Division. She has been awarded honorary degrees from the University of Oslo, the University of Havana, and the National University in Mexico. Rebecca Greenspan is the Secretary General at the Ibero-American General Secretariat. Prior to this position, she has been Vice President in Costa Rica, position in which she also coordinated the Minister's Cabinet for Social and Economic Sectors, Housing, and Human Settlements. She was also the Vice Minister of Finance. Rebecca Greenspan has also served as UN Undersecretary General, Associate Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, and Director of the United Nations Development Program's Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean. Carmen Reinhardt was recently appointed as Vice President of Development Economics and Chief Economist of the World Bank Group. She is on public service leave from Harvard Kennedy School, where she is the Minos Sobanakis Professor of International Financial System. Previously, she was Senior Policy Advisor and Deputy Director at the International Monetary Fund and held positions as Chief Economist and Vice President at the investment bank Bear Stearns. In 2018, she has awarded the King Juan Carlos Prize in Economics and the Naves Adam Smith Award, among other very important recognitions. Paula Santilli is the CEO of PepsiCo Latin America and the former president of PepsiCo Mexico Foods. With 20-year experience in the corporate world, she leads the company's food and beverage business across the region. Paula is committed to generate inclusive growth in Latin America. In 2019, she was included in Fortune's 50 Most Powerful Women International list and in Forbes' 100 Most Powerful Women. And last but of course not least, Professor Joseph Stiglitz. She's an economist and professor at Columbia University, a recipient of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics Science and the John Bates Clark Medal. He's former senior vice president and chief economist at the World Bank, former member and chairman of the US President's Council of Economic Advisors. He's also the co-chair of the high-level expert group on the measurement of economic performance and social progress at the OECD. With this stellar panel, we have a very promising conversation. I will make 3 points just to lead off to our dialogue with the panelists. First, as we know, COVID-19 has hit the region really harshly. Actually, Latin America is the region that will suffer the most from this pandemic, according to estimates and forecasts. The IMF and the ECLAC have estimated very large decreases in output, employment, trade, and very important increases in poverty at the level of the scale of 45 to 50 million people at least. So in the same way in which the pandemic hits individuals who have this disease, according to pre-existing conditions, countries also have pre-existing conditions. In our region, low productivity, very high inequality, high levels of exclusion, and low trust in governments is precisely those pre-existing conditions that have made the impact of this crisis even deeper. So with this perspective, we need to build a better normal and to recover and go even beyond recovery. And that is the intention of today's conversation. Do we really have an opportunity to rethink the agreements among Latin American actors to build more inclusive and more sustainable societies? Social contracts can mean several things, but 3 characteristics are in the literature. One is they have to be sustainable economically, socially, and environmentally. Second, they have to be fair. People have to perceive that they are fair because a contract can only be valid among equals. And finally, they have to induce voluntary compliance. We don't want people to exit, using Hirschman's concept, the social contract. So we want people to be part voluntarily of that social contract. So this is quite a challenge. So do we have the conditions for that? So we start with you, Alicia, because you have worked with your teams in assessing the impact of the crisis, and you have estimated very, very important economic construction and a reduction in trade of about 23% for the region. And this has a large impact in our economies. So what are some of the recommendations for the region to rebound from this steep contraction and to build economic resilience in the long term? The floor is yours, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Luis Felipe. I'm going to speak in Spanish, so let me turn so I made the interpreters aware. La pandemia ha reflejado y ha revelado la fragilidad de la globalización y el multilateralismo. Se trata de una crisis sistémica, tanto de oferta como de demanda, y entonces ha evidenciado la urgencia de buscar un nuevo paradigma de desarrollo bajo la premisa de un gran impulso por la sostenibilidad económica, social y ambiental, y creo que muy en línea con la Agenda 2030. Creo que necesitamos un cambio estructural progresivo, y más que hablar de reconstrucción, tenemos que hablar de transformación, como bien dijiste tú, para elevar productividad con innovación, pero con la igualdad y la sostenibilidad en el centro. Estamos en un momento y en una encrucijada crítica, un momento excepcional en donde se está redefiniendo lo que es posible. Estamos mucho más abiertos a alterar el status quo y al cambio político. Es una oportunidad entonces. Hoy es posible hablar seriamente, por ejemplo, de un ingreso básico, del papel central del Estado, de la importancia de un pacto político, social y económico, tanto a nivel nacional como regional y global, y de un contrato social justo, inclusivo y progresivo. Nosotros hemos revelado en nuestros reportes y que esta crisis ha magnificado las brechas estructurales de América Latina. Hemos producido y hemos reflejado 10 hechos muy duros que tenemos que analizar para poder realmente hablar de una reconstrucción. Primero, la peor contracción en 100 años, 9,1, la caída del PIB. La región, además, las exportaciones caen menos 23%. El desempleo va a subir a 44 millones. La pobreza aumenta. 45 millones más de personas estarán en situación de pobreza, llegando a 230 millones de personas, de las cuales 96 millones estarán en la pobreza extrema. Y muchas de ellas son mujeres, es la parte de la sociedad más afectada. La desigualdad aumentará 5% en promedio y lo más delicado en materia de oferta, 2.7 millones de pequeñas y medianas empresas van a cerrar, especialmente microempresas. Hemos hecho un análisis de lo digital y vemos que 40 millones de hogares no están conectados ni tienen accesibilidad a Internet de buena calidad. Y la mayoría están en los quintiles más pobres. 32 millones de niños, niñas y adolescentes no pueden hacer teleeducación. Y por lo tanto estamos frente a una década perdida en lo económico, en lo social. Y tú has hablado muchas veces de los estratos medios. Hemos visto que 33 millones de personas van a caer de los estratos medios a la pobreza, de tal manera que 8 de cada 10 personas en nuestra región, 490 millones, van a requerir un ingreso básico y políticas universales. ¿Qué medidas proponemos? Y ahí voy rápidamente a ellas. Hemos propuesto medidas para estimular la demanda a partir de un gran impulso ambiental y de la sostenibilidad, que sea inversión y creación de empleo central para reconstruir mejor. Estamos calculando qué sectores pueden ser los que más empleo generen y puedan generar una economía más verde en realidad. Infraestructura digital, energía renovable, transporte, movilidad, inversiones en sectores básicos. Hemos comprendido que la salud, la región invierte poco en salud, 3% del PIB, muy por debajo de lo que estamos invirtiendo en pagar los intereses de la deuda externa. Y mantener el consumo de los hogares con un ingreso básico a todas las personas en situación de pobreza, equivalente a una línea de pobreza, $150 al mes para 230 personas, complementado con un bono contra el hambre que sería de alrededor de $47 al mes. Medidas para estimular la oferta. Tenemos que financiar y apoyar a las pequeñas y medianas empresas, especialmente a las microempresas, y ahí hemos sugerido subsidios, hemos sugerido extensiones de impuestos y de periodos de gracia. Y por supuesto, una promoción de políticas redistributivas para ir hacia una protección social universal, sobre todo en salud. Y ahí necesitamos un sistema fiscal mucho más progresivo y efectivo, que elimine la evasión fiscal, que es de 6.1% del PIB en América Latina. 325 mil millones de dólares salen de la región por evasión fiscal. Y revisar el gasto tributario, la renuncia tributaria que llega a casi 4% del PIB. Y definitivamente tenemos que aumentar los impuestos en muchos países y hacer que los impuestos regresivos del 1% más rico y las corporaciones, ¿verdad?, paguen donde hacen las ganancias de productividad. No solamente el BEPS, que está muy bien, pero hay que hacerlo donde hacen la ganancia de productividad. Y por supuesto, un gasto público mucho más inclusivo. Hemos hecho otra propuesta, Luis Felipe, sobre cómo dotar a todos los hogares de una sociedad digital inclusiva, y hemos calculado que costaría 1% del PIB realmente dotar a todos los hogares que no tienen de una canasta básica digital. Y hemos visto que esto podría aumentar grandemente la inclusión financiera, la inclusión digital. Así es de que, y por último, yo diría, tenemos que hablar de que los gobiernos no van a poder sostener este gasto fiscal y esta inversión tan grande que están haciendo ya. Hoy los gobiernos están invirtiendo alrededor de 3.9% del PIB y 10% en garantías, pero va a requerirse de una cooperación internacional. Se requieren acuerdos multilaterales para proveer a la sociedad de bienes públicos globales, que son la salud, la paz, la estabilidad financiera, la seguridad climática, la igualdad, una economía del cuidado. Necesitamos entender que las mujeres deben ser reconocidas y revaloradas. Entonces, yo diría que, y por último, quizás el tema que me parece relevante para nuestra región es cómo vamos a confrontar una nueva geografía económica mundial en donde hay menor interdependencia en la producción, el comercio y la tecnología. Oíamos al presidente de Uruguay diciendo que queremos sociedades más abiertas y tal, pero la realidad es que el mundo se está reorganizando en 3 regiones, Norteamérica, Europa y Asia-Pacífico, y va a haber cada día más confrontación en términos de disputas comerciales y tecnológicas. Así es de que nuestra región tiene que entender cómo va a bajarse, cómo se va a relacionar en nuestra nueva geografía económica, y la integración regional deja mucho que desear. Estamos muy fragmentados en nuestra región. Realmente el comercio intrarregional ha caído en forma muy estrepitosa, ha caído un 28% solamente en el último año, y ya estaba más o menos en 13, cuando en Europa estamos en 60, en Asia Pacífico está en 45, o sea, lo que la región le vende a la propia región es menor al 13% hoy día. Entonces, sí tenemos que recalibrar, recalcular. Y yo diría, las Naciones Unidas y el PNUD y nosotros y todos estamos trabajando hacia la construcción de un nuevo pacto en materia de financiamiento para el desarrollo, en donde realmente se pueda recapitalizar a las instituciones multilaterales financieras, en donde se pueda lograr la provisión de derechos especiales de giro, o por lo menos la reubicación de los que existen hoy día. Y creo que, sobre todo en nuestra región, tenemos que apoyar a los pequeños estados insulares del Caribe y de Centroamérica, que son los 2, yo diría, grupos de países que más ayuda requieren. Y creo que este proceso que el secretario general ha llevado adelante con el primer ministro de Jamaica y el primer ministro de Canadá puede lograr resultados tangibles. Después de la reunión que hubo ayer con ministros de finanzas, creo que hay elementos para transformar justamente esta dinámica. Así es que pacto social, político, económico, fiscal y un pacto global para la provisión de bienes públicos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Alicia. Very good. I think that shows 2 issues that we have been stressing. One is this is a systemic shock. And the second, it really requires to rethink rules and policies, agreements among different actors in every context. So, Rebecca Greenspan, in this context, governments are having to respond very rapidly and decisively in the very short term. But as you always say, the short term and the long term start at the same time. So whatever decisions are being made now will affect the nature of the recovery. So what are these characteristics that a more cohesive social contract should have, or we should aim at having as countries emerge from the crisis to create this new and better normal? Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Yes, now?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Luis Felipe, and it's a pleasure to be here. So we don't have much time, so let me start with a fundamental truth that we will be facing on January 1st, 21, when Latin Americans will wake up to an economy that is almost 10% smaller than it was only a year before. And as we heard from you and from Alicia, Almost 40 million of them will return to poverty, with 26 million in extreme poverty, something that we know that in Latin America translates directly into hunger. So this means that for the first time since 2010, the average person in Latin America will be poor, as opposed to middle class. They also, the citizens of the region, will wake up with children that have asymmetrically lost a big part of their year studies, raising inequality in education, women overburdened by domestic work again, and feeling, most of them, still uncertain about the future. Workers as well as businesses, because we will have high numbers of unemployment and 3 million formal companies that will have closed. And probably we will wake up in a very polarizing environment, since many of the countries will be closer to elections, because in 2021, we start what we call the electoral supercycle in Latin America. So even in the most optimistic scenario, one in which we begin to recover in the second semester of this year, with a vaccine for COVID being available sometime in 2021, the dream of a short-term crisis in a V-shaped recovery is almost dead. As we feared, Latin America will suffer hysteresis. Short-term issues will have evolved into long-term ones. Indeed, I think the IMF forecasts a recovery in 2021 of less than 4% for the region, a very small fraction of what we will lose this year. So simmering below this new panorama are long-standing issues, as you said before, that the region was already dealing before the pandemic hit. But let me add to what you have said, Luis Felipe, that that we were experiencing an increase in popular dissatisfaction with democracy and inequality, something that led to huge protests in 2019. So I think that these protests are now paused by the lockdowns, but they will surely return. So let me try to get into what we think as a social contract, because we have no way of saying this lightly. On January 1st next year, Latin Americans will wake up to a dramatic panorama. And this is where the question of a new social contract comes into play. And as we know, the idea of rebuilding a new social contract is not new, but this time it really is different. This time around, the status quo simply cannot survive. Therefore, we only have two options. We either solve these problems together as a society via a new social contract, or we make these problems worse by doubling down on polarization, frustration, and short-term thinking. In other words, I think now a new social contract is not simply a wish, but a necessity. So what elements should be part of this social contract? The first of them is to restore trust. This was very clear in the address of President Lacalle today. A big part of Uruguay's success was that the citizens trust their institutions and their political system. This is a prerequisite to reach a new consensus. And I am not using the word consensus, I am using the word consensus intentionally, since we need a new consensus, not only at the national level, but also at the international level. And I hope that many of you will be talking about that. Latin America cannot go into a social contract without having the backing of the international finance institutions and the development banks. We won't be able to go out of this crisis alone. So let me go back to the conditions. Nationally, a condition to restore trust, particularly having a focus on reducing inequality and increasing the public space, including the role of the state. But the revalorization of the public state is not, of the public space, sorry, is not a revalorization of the state. It's also what we build together. And I think that that should be clear, since we need the private sector, we need social, civil society, and citizenship to be part of this social contract. A second element of the new social contract is that it must be inclusive. It must champion women and youth and invest strongly in basic social services. This is the only way to dismantle the time bomb that is the current level of frustration with democracy in the region. A third element is that it must think long-term. As you said, my favorite phrase, be pro-green growth. That's the transformative economy we have to go for, and pro-employment. For this, we'll need to dramatically increase investment in physical and digital infrastructures, promote regional integration, upskill our workforce, and help our SMEs. Fourth element is that it needs to champion a fiscal reform, like Alicia was saying. And we will need to increase the fiscal base by fighting tax evasion, corruption, and informality, and by putting in place more progressive tax and antitrust regimes. We are the most unequal region in the world, and this is a huge obstacle for our economic prospects and our social cohesion. And lastly, let me say that the new social contract must be green, as I said before, and promote sustainability in the 2030 agenda. It won't be easy. It will require a lot of work, a lot of dialogue, and most importantly, let me say, a lot of leadership. I think that never before our future depended so much on the quality of leadership at this time. And leadership not only from government, but also, as I said, from private sectors and civil society. Without good leadership and quality leadership, it will be very difficult to get to the agreements that we need for a transformative agenda, but also a just and fair agenda, as you said before, Luis Felipe. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think one of the elements to make this, to reach these new agreements, certainly is the trust and the issues that have been mentioned in this conversation, but also it requires certain levels of certainty and resources. So the fiscal aspects also matter. So Carmen Reinhardt, you recently mentioned in an article in Foreign Affairs that there are indicators that suggest that globally the path towards recovery will be long. And that really matters for all these also to be possible. So do you think the recovery will be long for Latin America? Carmen, the floor is yours.
I think the recovery will be long, period. I think it will be particularly long for Latin America. Latin America has been hit especially hard, but that doesn't imply that I think that a V-shape or anything resembling a V-shape is in the making for the global economy at large. The article you mentioned made the point, don't confuse rebound with recovery, that, you know, for a lot of indicators, because we've had massive collapses this year, you're going to see, you know, a snapback. But if you look at per capita incomes, you know, we are talking, you know, upward of 5 years to get back to the pre-crisis level. I think, as I said, so I'm worried about the global outlook, and I'm especially worried about Latin America. Both Alicia and Rebecca have lucidly illustrated and discussed a lot of the challenges. I will mention two more, and a third one that is probably the most worrisome. The two more I'm going to mention is, and these haven't been mentioned, Latin America continues to be as commodity dependent today as probably as it was in the 19th century. And so the global commodity cycle has played also a very important role in shaping the fate of the region. That, the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, it was really a crisis in 11 advanced economies. And, it hit emerging markets hard, but emerging markets rebounded sharply, in large part, in the case of Latin America, especially because, China was growing at double digits. Commodity markets, as a consequence of that rapid growth, and a lot of that growth was commodity intensive, was really nothing but good news in the region. And at the time, there was a lot of optimism, in places like Brazil, how inequality and poverty were looking a lot better. But those gains turned out to be transient. So I one issue I wanted to issue, we're continue to be dependent on commodities. We continue to be dependent in Latin America on external finance, which is, volatile capital flows, are a chronic feature in the region, and expensive foreign finance. During this crisis, probably the single bond that has carried the highest coupon was floated by El Salvador, 9.5% for a bond when rates are close to zero. So, the dependence on commodities, the dependence on external finance are also big challenges, in addition to all the things that Alicia and Rebecca have mentioned. What worries me even more about all of this is that we could have had this conversation 20 years ago, and all these factors would have been listed. And we could have maybe had it 40 years ago, certainly. And, remember the 80s, how well they worked out for the region. So I think, the fact that these challenges span decades and decades and decades is very troubling. And so I'm not going to offer, light, how we're going to revamp, a new model for the region. I wouldn't know what to say. One area that I would like to say something that the region should prepare for, and this is not just Latin America specific, but I think it hit Latin America hard in the context of your question, going back to the question of how swift the recovery is, understandably, we're all worried about the health crisis and the output collapses and the surge in unemployment and the surge in poverty. But behind this is a quieter financial crisis lurking, meaning, the banks are being hit by, how many of those small businesses or households will be able to repay debts. So what I'm saying is that this cuts across regions, and it cuts across income levels too. That I think, I'm worried about the frailty of the banking system, because I think we're in for another credit crunch. And credit crunch is a headwind to recovery. So I think, policymakers in the region would really do well to start thinking about, how to restructure the existing non-performing assets that are likely to come out of this. Right now, in a lot of countries in our region and in others, are under almost a state of suspension because, in many places, you know, households and firms have grace periods. So payments aren't being made, and it's hard to know what's insolvent and what's illiquid. But I think by next year, we will be facing, you know, a new wave in the same or a financial problem that is a byproduct of everything that's happening this year. But most importantly, my concern is that that will be yet another headwind to recovery. Recovering without credit, recovering when households and firms are trying to delever, and recovering generally in a period in which I think just international resources are going to be a lot scarcer for the region.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Paula. And we're talking about, the reaching new agreements among different actors in society. We're talking about resources that are needed, fiscal space limited, and social protection systems that are fragmented. There is an important role that the private sector could play, and the corporations can play potentially in this construction of the new social contract. What do you think the private sector's role could be in this recovery and the construction of this new social contract to build a new normal that is more inclusive and more resilient? The floor is yours, Paula.
Yes, Luis Felipe, thank you. I have to agree that most of my colleagues here on the panel have pictured a very grim situation for Latin America. And as a business leader of a huge company with an enormous footprint in Latin America, we have over 70,000 direct employees in Latin America. We do everything from go to the little stores up and down the streets of every single city in Latin America. We do farming and agro work with thousands and thousands of little agro growers. I have one important premise for all of us, the 4,000 people, maybe Luis Felipe on this call. We as leaders have the obligation of putting out there an optimistic tone, a willingness of knowledge that we will rebuild growth, that we will bring prosperity back to the families in Latin America. At least, Luis Felipe, that is my personal commitment and that of my company in PepsiCo. No? We believe that if we leaders are knowledgeable about the difficult situation, I'm not denying any of the numbers that the people here have carefully crafted. Those are very strong facts. However, I think we need to be optimistic. I think the families in Latin America are waiting for leadership that can bring ideas and plans to execute growth and bring prosperity, inclusiveness, sustainable growth to all those families out there. Okay, so that's what you have, number one for me. Please, let's bring an optimistic view. Number two, this is an extraordinary opportunity for Latin America to be completely transformational. And all of us together, business number one, have to help governments think exactly where are the resources necessary to completely transform our countries. No? Do we have to look at new industries that do not exist in Latin America today? For example, digital industries. No, I think Alicia mentioned that. Do we have to reinvent agro industries? Can we become the feeders of the world from Latin America? No, industrial agro products are something we can do so well. The other one is tourism, for example. Anyway, the message here is we need to look at what we have today, whether it's health infrastructure, education, or businesses, and together look at what are those industries that can, bring those growth needs quickly to Latin America. Finally, Luis Felipe, we as industries, we want a seat at the table. We want to collaborate with governments, with NGOs, with organisms like the ones you represent. And let's talk, because as business people, there are a few things we can do well. And that is we can, set a vision, decide on a strategy, and develop and execute plans, do the real fundamentals on the ground that create and materialize that vision. So let us help you, let us talk together in a very collaborative fashion, maybe a lot more than what Latin America has seen in the past. So sometimes, and it depends on the government, we have governments that are very business friendly, others are not so much. So, maybe it's time to bring down those old prejudices of the past and work together to set a new optimistic growth opportunity for Latin America. Luis Felipe, to end, my 4 grandparents came in a boat to Latin America from Europe. Okay, they were fleeing from horrible situations in the old continent. They came with nothing, okay? And they came in a boat, they landed on the shores of Latin America, and they built who we are in Latin America today. I feel a little like my grandparents. Today is a marvelous, marvelous opportunity to jump on a boat that might be different, might be scary, but that will certainly take us to a better journey. Luis Felipe, myself personally as a business leader, the company I lead today in Latin America, we are willing to be on the boat and to create a beautiful, huge wake that creates prosperity for more and more families in Latin America. And we will do that with humbleness, but also with an enormous amount of optimism.
Thank you, Paula. Very powerful message. Professor Stiglitz, we have seen a very complicated context and some ideas on how to turn this into an opportunity. We'll always look at you as a fundamental intellectual reference in our region. Just to mention something, your recent role in the renegotiation of the Argentine debt. And so this is not time for orthodoxy. We need very decisive and ambitious responses from governments, but this requires a coordinated effort, and it requires the support of the international community and the financial sector. How do you think the financial systems internationally can support countries in financing this response that, as we heard, will be long, and the recovery actions to this pandemic? Please, Professor Stiglitz, the floor is yours.
Yes, well, I think we've had a very good description of how deep the crisis is, a vision of what we could do, what Latin America can do to get out of it. The impact on national budgets has been enormous, on national deficits has been enormous. Even in countries like the United States, our deficit GDP, our debt GDP ratio will reach over 100% any month. And the numbers of our deficit to GDP ratio are numbers 15% or more that have almost never been heard of from advanced countries. So, and for developing countries and emerging markets in Latin America, it's a real challenge. So first, the cost of not doing anything is far greater than the cost of doing something. So I think we are right in the United States to have had a massive program, $3 trillion and roughly $3 trillion from the Federal Reserve. And I think Latin America
those Latin American countries that have recognized the magnitude of the challenge and have responded, are doing the right thing. But the fact that it is having budgetary implications has two consequences. The first is we have to be very careful in the design. And when I say we, every country has to be very careful in the design of the programs. They have to be targeted, they have to be timely, they have to be very sensitive to the differences across individuals, firms, sectors. So just to highlight one thing that we've discovered in the United States, our country is very badly divided in many, many ways. One way is that a very large part of the country is living paycheck to paycheck, roughly half. And the moment they get the money, they spend it. And if they don't get the money, they don't spend it. That means money going to these groups is very stimulative to the economy. And if we don't give it, the social consequences are enormous. And Alicia has talked about some of those social consequences. On the other hand, the people at the top have a very large cushion. A remarkable thing about what has happened is the average savings rate in the United States last quarter was 25%. And this is in a country where the normal savings rate has been 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, but never 25%. So, and you realize that half the population are saving 0. That means the other half, that's saving 25%, is saving the average is 25. They're saving even more than that. So we have to be very sensitive to how we spend the money. And the United States didn't do a very good job. In spite of spending $3 trillion, the unemployment rate is soared. There are a lot of people who are very vulnerable. And that message is even more important for Latin America. The part of directing your attention is making sure that health is number one, and protecting the vulnerable. And again, these were deficiencies in the response here in the United States. Another implication, though, of the fact that money is so tight is that we have to make the money that we spend do dual purpose, and sometimes triple purpose. And by that, I mean, we have to build back the economy, to use the word Biden has put, build back the economy better. The crisis has exposed, if we weren't aware of it before, a lot of the problems, a lack of resilience, but most importantly, the inequalities that are very deep in our societies. So we have to make sure that the money we spend is serving multiple purposes. And one of the key issues is dealing with climate change. If we don't, we're going to be facing another crisis in the coming years. So it is absolutely imperative to use the money that we're spending to help create, facilitate the green transition. And some of the research that I've done with Nick Stern and Cameron Hepburn at Oxford has pointed out that one can spend the money in a very effective way, timely, cost-effective, labor-intensive, in supporting the green transition. So that's the second message that comes out of the fact that we are going to be facing fiscal challenges. Internationally, though, we're all in the same boat together. The pandemic has shown that that the disease goes across, that virus goes across borders. Carbon dioxide molecules go across borders, and we have a global economy today. And so we won't recover from the pandemic, and we won't recover economically until the whole world is recovery. And therefore, I believe very strongly it's in the international community's interest to make sure that every part of the world recovers. And it was pointed out after 2008, there was a strong Chinese recovery that helped pull up Latin America, the commodity prices. That's not likely to happen. China is going to be doing better than much of the rest of the world, but it's not going to be doing great. And what it's going to be doing already indicates that it won't be importing the magnitudes that it did in the 2008 crisis. So I don't think the world can rely on that. Now, there are some instruments, and the IMF has shown a leadership, and the multilateral development banks have shown some leadership. One thing is an issuance of $500 billion of SDRs. That can be done without going back to the parliaments. And there's a broad consensus over that. One country is holding it up. And I won't tell you which country that is, but I think you could probably figure that out. No good reason for that. And hopefully come a new administration in Washington, that will change. In fact, there's been a bill submitted to Congress to go beyond the $500 billion to $2 trillion of SDRs. And many of the European countries have made a commitment to donate or lend their SDRs to the emerging markets and least developed countries that need it. So the good news is, and you want to be optimistic, as Paula said, the good news is that there are a lot of people who understand the importance of global solidarity. And they've said, here's an instrument we have, and we will contribute our support for this. There has been, Carmen emphasized the problems of a looming financial crisis, and that's also true at the international scale. There are many countries that will not be able to pay their debts. There's been a G20 resolution for a stay for the least developed countries in debt payments, but it has to be far broader than that. That stay was just for the least developed countries and only for the official debt. And unfortunately, in recent years, there's been a lot of private lending, and the private creditors have not been very cooperative, unfortunately, and have seen this as an opportunity to extract a pound of flesh. And things have, in some cases they've gone better. Argentina did manage to get a resolution, but some of the countries have faced, let me say, much more difficulties. So we need not only a much more comprehensive stay on the debt, there's going to be a lot of restructuring that's going to be needed. And we should have created an international bankruptcy framework for sovereign debt along the lines that the UN adopted in 2015, overwhelmingly, with only a few countries opposed. But unfortunately, some of the countries opposing were some of the critical countries. And again, that has not proceeded in the way that it should. Finally, let me just say that in the run up to the 2008 crisis, there was a lot of discussion of a savings glut. In recent years, interest rates have been near zero. What is clear is that there's a lot of savings available. There's a lot of long-term investments that would help the recovery in the constructive way that we want, the green transition, address some of the infrastructure problems, very strong in Latin America. But standing between these long-term funds, people who sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, and the long-term needs of investment are short-sighted financial markets. And the multilateral development banks have played a critical role in moving towards longer-term investment. And CAF has played a very important role in that. And so I think this is really a moment where there needs to be a further recapitalization, further strengthening of the multilateral development banks, because what we need now as part of this recovery is more long-term vision. And that long-term vision, which includes green transition and more inclusive growth, is what will enable us to have a stronger recovery from the pandemic.
Thank you very much. I take from this very rich conversation that we can turn this into an opportunity, but it's not going to happen spontaneously. We need to be proactive. We need to come up with ideas and to create coalitions to push for certain things. So we will merge this second round to be able to also hear from questions from the audience, to try to give an opportunity for the panelists to speak again, but based on the questions from all the people that are participating. So if you don't mind, when in your responses, I will step in just to make sure that we have shorter answers and we can go around all the panelists. So I'm gonna give the floor to our Master of Ceremonies to guide us through the questions of the audience, please.
Thank you, Luis Felipe. We have many questions. Let's see how much time do we have left. We have one from Colombia, David Genovich. He asked, do you think the new social contract will inevitably lead to a greater state participation in economic and social decisions? Do you think this will imply more collective decision making, collective capital allocation?
Okay, so maybe, I don't know if because of the first session, if Rebecca and Alicia would like to respond. Maybe you, Rebecca, first.
Gracias, Luis Felipe. Es una muy buena pregunta, pero yo creo que no es una pregunta técnica, es una pregunta política. ¿Cuánto es la participación del Estado? Si esta tiene que aumentar o no, depende de cuál es el punto de entrada. Lo que yo sí creo que tiene que pasar es que el Estado tiene que ser mucho más proactivo en los sectores productivos para crear las condiciones para algo que Paula llamaba los nuevos sectores, la nueva economía, las nuevas ideas. Y lo otro que tiene que hacer sin duda es terminar de cumplir con los déficits del siglo XX. O sea, el tema de educación y salud y del acceso universal a la protección social no pueden esperar más. Pero estas cosas no se van a poder hacer si solo es una decisión del Estado. Tiene que haber un diálogo social para que sea sostenible y para que sea legitimado por el resto de los actores. No es hacerlo en un escritorio, es un problema político, es un problema de diálogo social y de tener las prioridades claras.
Gracias, Rebeca. Alicia.
Gracias, muy breve. Creo que debe de ser un Estado social, no un Estado autoritario. Creo que sí, el Estado está llamado a jugar un papel muy relevante, pero un Estado representativo, un Estado que no favorezca a la élite. Nuestra región está cansada de la cultura del privilegio y debemos ir entonces a una cultura de la igualdad, es decir, una cultura que no solo favorezca a ciertos sectores y por lo tanto, por eso, las políticas tienen que ser más progresivas y realmente, como bien dijo Joe, tiene que haber accountability, rendición de cuentas para evitar que salgamos de esta crisis más endeudados, más pobres, más hambrientos y más enojados. Y ese enojo social tiene que ser canalizado por un Estado representativo. Y creo que ahí es donde está la clave para llamar un Estado que convoque a toda la sociedad justamente a un diálogo amplio. Eso pienso.
Muchas gracias, Alicia. Would anybody else from the panel like to respond to this question, or we go to the next? Let's go to the next then.
Gracias, Luis Felipe. Tenemos otra pregunta. Esta llega desde de Víctor Falguera. No dice el país. En algunos países, dice Víctor, es bastante claro que la pandemia está favoreciendo el resurgir por un interés por las zonas rurales, que tradicionalmente han sido zonas que han enfrentado una desventaja en términos de infraestructura y conectividad. ¿Cuáles son los elementos específicos en las estrategias de desarrollo post-COVID para aprovechar esta oportunidad? Victor Falguera asks, in many countries, it is already quite clear that the pandemic is favoring the resurgence of the interest for rural areas traditionally disadvantaged in terms of infrastructure and connectivity. Which are the specific key elements in the post-COVID development strategies to seize this opportunity? Luis Felipe.
Thank you. Paula, given the engagement that the corporate world has in these areas, would you like to say something about this?
Yes, I agree with the question with Victor. I think the rural areas in Latin America are really a powerhouse for Latin America. And we can create more and better jobs, and we should in these rural areas. Of course, we also need the help from governments in building infrastructure such as roads, no? Like, let's have a road or a train railway where we need it, no? Or a communication capacity, no? This is a real industry that we have to explore and explode in a very interesting way. It creates better little towns of people that are traditionally tied to the land, and that is a huge benefit for these huge mega cities in Latin America, where living has become almost impossible because of lack of or too much traffic or lack of services, etc. So we definitely have to put our heads together and think how we make Latin America the silo of the world, in the sense of the silo, no, the cereales and other agronomical crops.
Relating to the previous comment by Professor Stiglitz on the long term, and the idea how the government can actually focus on these long-term investments to crowd in the private investment, and perhaps also create institutional infrastructure for impact investment and for the more socially oriented private sector investments. Do you see development in this as an opportunity for development in these areas, Professor Stiglitz?
Yes. I mean, let me say first, though, that it's going to be important for Latin America to continue its transformation. This picks up what Carmen said. It's already too commodity dependent. And so it really will have to continue with its, you might say, diversification, its industrialization, it's moving to a service sector economy, tourism, lots of different areas, but it can't just go back to a rural economy. And one of the challenges is how do you create urban environments which are safe? And I do think that one can do that. And New York City has managed to get the incidence of the disease down dramatically. But that requires some of the things that have already been talked about. High levels of trust, reliance on science and expertise. Those countries in Latin America, and there are several, who have turned their back on science, on modernization, are going to the rural areas not going to solve their problem. They're going to be poorer 5 years from now, 10 years from now, than they were before the pandemic. So what the challenge for Latin America is to continue its development strategy and accelerate it rather than just going back to the past.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if Carmen, if you would like to add something on this.
I think, you know, first of all, on the rural versus urban, you know, there are going to be new urban challenges because it looks that this is coming out in the next poverty report of the World Bank, that a lot of the new poor is urban poor. So, I mean, the challenge ahead will also involve dealing with the newly created poor, which tend to be more urban, tend to be more women, tend to be better educated than the traditional poverty rates. But getting to the heart of the question, one concern I have, my co-author Graciela Kaminsky did many years ago an interesting comparison on how Asian countries, this is going back to the 1980s crisis, how Asian countries adjusted vis-a-vis Latin American countries. Latin American countries took the axe literally to investment, to infrastructure investment, and to investment in, you know, public investment, including education, and public investment suffered disproportionately so to other, you know, to government consumption disproportionately relative to Asia. I think, you know, in line of what Joe was also saying, if you're thinking of a medium-term strategy, you have to be very selective of, you know, what trade-offs you make, because, you know, investment is always the discretionary variable. So it's easier to act in times of stress, but the medium-term consequences, you know, are also, you know, quite substantive.
Thank you, Carmen. Can we go to another question, please?
Yes, thank you. This is from Jose Luis Martinez. He says, Latin America and the Caribbean is in the middle of a very complex economic crisis. The investment in education and health historically has not been attended in the right with the right levels of budget. Which would be the mechanism in a short term to refloat, to recover the economy of the region, taking into consideration that the internal problems of the most of the nations in the region is corruption? José Luis dice, América Latina atraviesa una crisis económica muy compleja. Las inversiones en educación y salud no han sido históricamente atendidas de manera oportuna. ¿Cuáles serían los mecanismos a corto plazo para reflotar las economías, considerando que el problema interno de la mayoría de las naciones de la región es la corrupción? José Luis.
Thank you. When I go, I think this is a question for also Alicia and perhaps Rebecca. Alicia, you have been talking about these issues recently.
Sí, muchas gracias. I would like to say that, let me turn to English for a moment. I would like to say that governance is a very important issue, and I agree with the question that corruption has been very high in the region and trust is missing. So we definitely need to move to more accountable transparency in terms of the, for example, the public expenditure and the public policies in general. So I really believe this is something that we need to move into very, very quickly. But before I leave the floor, Luis Felipe, because I will have to disconnect, as you know, I just wanted to raise a very quick point that Joe Stiglitz raised before, and I think it's very important to see what the international community, and I think taking the advantage that Carmen is also here, that I do agree that we have a risk of reprimarization and a risk of higher dependency on external financing. So what can be done and what's the type of collaboration and cooperation we need from the external community, and basically a potential insolvency of the middle income countries. And I think we are a region of middle income countries, and I don't see yet in the responses in the DSSI, for example, the debt initiative that has been put forward by G20 or the IFIs. I don't see yet how the middle income countries, particularly Central American economies and Caribbean economies, because we have also larger economies that can do better and have access to capital markets. But the Caribbean and the Central America, which have different problems, structural problems, how can we advocate more forcefully into a collaboration that we need very, very strongly? So let me leave it there. I think SDRs is one, but most importantly, the lending capacity, the debt sustainability is something that we need to talk about in the region collectively, I think.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you for your participation. Rebecca, I'll give the floor to you on this issue of governance and corruption. So how we can build the trust given the recent record in the region regarding, cases of corruption.
Bueno, Luis Felipe, hace muy poquitos días publicamos un artículo juntos precisamente sobre este tema y dijimos que el problema que teníamos y los retos que teníamos no eran solo económicos, sociales y ambientales, sino también problemas de gobernanza. Y yo no tengo dudas de lo que se ha dicho, de que la corrupción es un elemento que quita la confianza en las instituciones públicas y en el sistema político. Y por tanto, lograr una reforma fiscal con una desconfianza sobre las instituciones es una tarea imposible, ¿no? Pero también tenemos el problema del huevo y la gallina, ¿no? Si esperamos a que todo se arregle, entonces no vamos a hacer nada ahora, y ahora tenemos que actuar. Y es por eso que muchos de nosotros hemos insistido en el diálogo social, ¿no? De alguna manera, el problema es buscar soluciones y no culpables. Y yo siento que en mucho de la discusión estamos buscando más culpables que soluciones, ¿no? En el diálogo social tendrá que haber sistemas mucho más transparentes y tendrán que haber mucha más rendición de cuentas. Yo creo sinceramente que ahí la tecnología puede ayudar mucho. Hay sistemas que se han puesto en ejecución que permiten mucha más transparencia de los gobiernos y del gasto que antes. Pero la pregunta sigue siendo, como han dicho, como Joe dijo también y como dijo Karen, ¿en qué gastar? Y en qué gastar, insisto, van a haber muchas opiniones. No es que hay una sola opinión de en qué gastar, cómo gastar y para quién gastar. Y eso va a requerir, insisto, porque yo sé que no vamos a tener otra oportunidad, insisto, va a requerir diálogos, coaliciones, alianzas y al final terminaremos en un nuevo diálogo y contrato social porque el anterior no es posible de mantener. Y yo eso estoy segura porque yo espero que lo que no tengamos que añadir a los problemas que tenemos sean crisis políticas en nuestros países. Hay que evitar la crisis política a través del diálogo y de la concertación.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. We can take this as the take-home message from you. And as you know, we and UNDP are relaunching our governance program and we're working together. So thank you also for trust and the collaboration. We're going to take 30 seconds for each of you, the rest of the panelists, to give us sort of a take-home message because we have only 1 minute left. So let's go very briefly, take-home message from all of you, and then we can close. So let's start with Paula.
So Luis Felipe, listen, we're here to help, to help create prosperity in Latin America. We do it from our individual role. First of all, we have a responsibility with our employees, making sure they are safe as well as their family. Secondly, in the communities where we operate, we have a very deep, entrenched muscle that works together with communities. And third, from our role of small commerce in particular, we have a role in reactivation, in economic reactivation by bringing suppliers, more and more suppliers into our chain, as well as little up and down the street stores that are vital to all these communities in Latin America. So Luis Felipe, from our side as business people, we will do our absolute best to help as much as we can to bring prosperity to Latin America fast and in an inclusive fashion.
Thank you very much, Carmen.
So I will take up on Alicia's point of the what is the role of the multilateral. So I will grossly oversimplify given the time constraints, but I think a takeaway is you do a lot of lending into the shock, because they're stepping in for the private sector in which lending has been limited and very costly. And if that means, expanding the resources via SDRs, allocations and so forth, this is in the short run. I do think, however, at some point you cross the Rubicon and many or not uniformly, but many countries will be facing debt crises. At that point, you try to make the restructuring process as short and level the playing field to the extent you can between debtors and creditors, including legislation in financial centers, which can level the playing field, moving to majority contracts, things that are likely to shorten the span. The average historic restructuring is over 7 years, and it involves multiple tries. So we don't want to replicate that. So in a nutshell, short run, you fund the emergency, medium term, prepare to help the restructuring process, facilitate a better restructuring process than in the past.
Thank you, Carmen. And finally, very brief message, Professor Stiglitz.
Well, three brief messages. First, we have to control the pandemic. That needs to be the first order of priority. And that requires generating trust, using reliance on science and expertise. And too many countries in Latin America have failed in that critical test. Secondly, acting now in terms of the economy is critical. There are these hysteresis effects. Not doing it, taking strong action now is going to have long-lasting effects. Spending money now is what is needed. And thirdly, the multilateral development banks, the international financial institutions have a critical role to play at this critical moment in Latin America. And the good news is, to pick up Paula's emphasis on optimism, they've actually been doing a fantastic job.
Thank you very much. Stellar panel. It has been a lot of food for thought. Also, we as UNDP engage in this dialogue in every country. We learn a lot from this conversation. Thank you to the CAF conference for giving us the opportunity again to be here to discuss the challenges in the region. I give the floor back to our Master of Ceremony.
Thank you, Luis Felipe. It is wonderful to see so much interest and engagement from our viewers. And with that, day one of the 24th CAF conference has concluded. I hope you agree that we have had a great first day. I would like to highlight how important is the challenge to control the pandemic, to rely on science and the economic growth. As our panel said, it should be built with green, social, and inclusive concepts. And the sentence that I remember from our keynote speaker, the world should be free and open. That's the future. That was the sentence of the president of Uruguay in this session, in this first day. I want to thank our media partners, El País, América Economía, and NTN 24. We look forward to welcoming you tomorrow. We have 3 great sessions planned that will address some of the challenges that we hear today. Also, the region's health system, climate change, and the role of technology in the economic recovery. In the meantime, feel free to explore the feature of our unique platform and network with fellow attendees. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.